Hi there, my name is Ryan Gilfillan and I will be walking you through my very first Flatiron project, and that is the command line interface app creation. You'll see here I've already pulled up my README file, and that this includes a description of my app, installation instructions, usage, development, contributing, license, and code of conduct. So I will start by reading you the description, which is this CLI interacts with the user to show them a list of the current top 20 podcasts according to the live iTunes charts as reported by podbay.fm. If the user so chooses, they can then choose to see more information about a podcast from the list. This will then bring them to a list of URLs that can show them the podcast's website, their reviews on podbay.fm, and a list of their available episodes. After you've installed, the first thing you'll need to do is run bundle install. And then to run my program, you will just need to enter bin/run.rb. Before we do that and hit enter, I just wanted to walk you through a couple of my files. First, within bin, I have my run file, where I have my shebang that tells my computer that the rest of the code it will be reading is in Ruby. I require my environment file, and then I tell my app that I want to run an app. An app is a variable that is my command line interface class.new. So running a new instance of my command line. So first I'll show you my environment file. It's very easy. It just has bundler required and require relative of all of my lib files. Within lib, I have CLI, my Podbay scraper, and my podcast class. My podcast class is very simple. My adder reader, our title and URL, my adder accessor, our open website, read reviews, an episode list, and all of these help connect it to my podcast Podbay scraper. I have an initialization method and a all method. And if we move on to my scraper, my scraper class has a base URL of Podbay's top podcasts browsing URL. The first class method that I have within this file is scrape podcasts, and this is where I've narrowed down, I've used Nokogiri to parse out that base URL. I've narrowed it all the way down to podcast LIs, and I go through each podcast LI and determine that the title is found using these CSS selectors, and then I find that the URL is identified with these CSS selectors, and I create a new podcast with each of those that I find, giving them a title and a URL. And then I have Scrape Podcasts show all the podcasts that are created from this list. I did choose to have the cards go only through the first 20, which is indexes 0 through 19. My second class method is scrape details from a podcast that you give it as an argument, and I use the URL created from up here from the instance of the podcast, and I give it a new HTML, which I'm going to parse using Nokogiri, and it's again the URL from the instance we're using added to the end of podbay.fm. That brings up the second page that I'll be scraping, and the details that I've selected that are going to show up in the second layer of my app are an open website option where we can just look at that podcast's their own website, a reading reviews of this podcast according to Podbay users, and looking at an episode list of the instance of the podcast from Podbay as well. And so I just had to parse and find which index all of those separate URLs were in. And then in my CLI, finally, I have a run method that runs a welcome method. It does the first round of scraping the list of podcasts, and then it does a menu loop method. In order to try and abstract as well as I could and get run to be really easy to read what it was doing, I took out simple greetings and salutations. So I have a welcome method that is just putting a message. Salutation is the same, oops is the same, and that is for when you come across instances of someone putting in trying edge case input, user input, and so that'll pop up and try and get them to put in something that is acceptable to the program. In my menu loop, I grabbed user input from the option menu method, and where I ask, would you like to see today's real-time top 20 podcasts according to the iTunes charts, yes or no? I get their user input and make it downcase, and so then this loop up here uses that information and says if they include exit, or if the user input includes the letter N, or the user input is exit, give them a salutation. I needed to break the loop here. I did come across a problem where I had a infinite loop, and this was the solution. I discovered that just using binding pry, and with my cohort leader's help. It was the only time I had to ask for his help. Feel pretty good about that. My else if part of this loop is if it includes the lowercase y, so that if my user is inputting something like yeah, yes, or capital yes, I remember that I'm downcasing everything. So any of those will have a lowercase y. If they try to put something else in, they're going to get the oops message, and they're going to start this menu loop over. So I'm going to force them to either tell me exit, no, or yes. If yes, and they're ready to move on, we see a list of the top podcasts, which is done through a method right here where we scrape, and we put them all next to a numbered list 1 to 20. And then we're going to go to the choose podcast method, which is here. It asks them to select a number from the list to learn more about the corresponding podcasts, or enter exit to return to the menu. And we start a loop where we get the user's input, and we also set a variable integer input so that we can make the user input into an integer where we need it. This ended up being really important because I couldn't just have all of their input go to an integer, because I have an option where they can type exit, and if exit turns into an integer, it will go to the value of 0 as an integer. It just turns any string that's not a number into 0. So that was fun to find out. And so if they say exit, we're going to give them a salutation and give them a menu loop, bringing them back to the very beginning if they'd like to, or they can stop. I also had to have this break here for an infinite loop. My else if is if they give me anything between, if their integer input, so they did give a number and it converted it from a string number to an integer, is included in this range 1 to 20, then I need to make their index that's related to it the integer input -1. I put that index into podcast.all, and that is this instance of the podcast. And then I use the scrape details method on the class Podbase Scraper. And then I use this instance we're going through to display podcast details. So display podcast details is the last method in this file, and it's mostly what I am interacting with the user with at the end, but the important part is that my scraped information is going to end up on these lines: open their website, read their reviews, check out their existing episodes. This was all done in the Podbase Scraper. And then I get their input on what they want to do, because as I tell them, this is the final option of this podcast. If you'd like to return to the menu, please enter exit. And so if they enter exit, it gives them a salutation and goes back to the start menu. If they don't type in exit, I say, sorry, I didn't understand that. I give them the oops message, and it starts back from the beginning if they'd like to. So those are my files, and I will show you how it runs. So welcome to the Top 20 Podcast app. Would you like to see today's real-time Top 20 podcasts according to the iTunes charts? Yes or no? I'm going to give it a yes. Select the number from the list to learn about the corresponding podcast, or enter exit to return to the menu. So of the live list from iTunes charts, as reported by Podbay, I can go with any of these. And just to test that I did one of my ranges correctly, I'm going to choose one of the first or the last. I'll go with 20. Okay, that worked. And it says copy and paste to your URL to see the additional details. Now, depending on your terminal, you could just click the URL, which is really nice. But I have these options, and again, tell them this is the last option. If they'd like to return to the menu, please enter exit. I'm going to do so that I can show a couple other use examples. So if I am in here and it says, do you want to do this? And I decide I don't, I can hit exit. Okay, would you like to try again? Sure, I'll go to the list. I'll go to, I'll just hit exit. Alrighty, have a nice day. Would you like to see today's real-time podcast? No. Alrighty, have a nice day. Select a number from the list. Let's go with white lies. I've never heard of that. And now I'll just show you that these are pulling the correct information. So this should open the website for white lies. It is an NPR podcast. Interesting. Okay, so you could read up on information about this. If you want to see their reviews on Podbay, what people are thinking about this podcast, which is number 12, so I'm sure they're thinking highly of it. Oh, 0 ratings. Well, this is the review page. Existing episodes according to Podbay. They have them listed here. So that's an example of my program working. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough, and I will be sure in my blog to give some recommendations on some things that really helped me through this first Flatiron project. I was speaking with my partner about this, and we're both going through Flatiron School, and he is further along than me and has gone through multiple projects, and he says if you can get through this first one, you can do the rest, and you really are a developer. You've done it now. So I feel really good about it. I'm really proud of my cohort, and I hope everybody enjoyed this. Thank you so much.